looking at our, I think, our first private members bill ever as a committee in this 44th Parliament. Welcome, Mr. Masse. You have up to 10 minutes, but if you can do 7, that would help us finish on time. But as I say, you have up to 10 minutes if you so choose.
Sure. No, and you know what, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for having me. And maybe you can just signal to me when you get to 1 minute, and I'll scoot on through and do that. I want to make sure that respect the committee's time and thing here. So I'm really pleased to be here and present Bill C-248. Members of this committee know that it was in the House of Commons and it passed first reading. I want to thank the authors of the bill, being the Librarian of Parliament, who helped work on it. It's a privilege to bring this legislation forward and to be the one doing so. This has been a big environmental movement in the Windsor area and Southern Ontario for a long time. We are endeavoring to protect lands for almost half a century, in particular this area, because of our industrialization and the fact that we also have a lot of agriculture, and so our natural areas have been taxed. And I want to say thanks to a number of groups, to essential partners, recognize Chief Duckworth of Caldwell First Nations, the Mayor and City Council of Windsor, Wildlands League, Unifor Environment Committee, Wildlife Preservation Canada, Citizens Environmental Alliance, Essex County Field Naturalists, Green Uma, Friends of Ojibway, and Save Ojibway organizations, and all the local residents over the years that have sent in thousands of petitions, letters, and so forth. It's been really special. The proposed Ojibway National Urban Park here in Windsor, Ontario, is part of a traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations that includes the Ojibway, Odawa, and Potawatomi, and with long-respecting relationships of First Nations. In fact, it's the oldest European settlement, and we're right next to it. It's west of Montreal, with over 300 years of Francophonie settlement as well, too. It's where the War of 1812 was fought. It's where the Underground Railroad was. It is also where the Rum Runners were. So there's been lots of heritage and tradition going on in this corridor. And the proposed urban park that we have here is part of Tallgrass Prairie. There's only 1% left in all of Canada. And this area is very special because it's been preserved almost by accident. There have been a number of different community organization groups that have been trying to protect this land over a number of different years, and it's come about really because the City of Windsor has been very good stewards, as well the Province of Ontario, and there has been some federal lands that I'm going to get into later that are now part of, really a change that could be not only good for 200 of Canada's 500 endangered species right down there, but also to ecotourism, and right next to it we're building the Gordie Howe Bridge, Canada's largest infrastructure project that goes into the United States. And so Ojibway Shores on the waterfront there is 33 acres and is the last undeveloped spot along the Detroit River in the City of Windsor and in the area, maybe in the Great Lakes, where it actually has a complex of a number of different tall grass, prairie, a number of different species at risk, and they connect into several other properties that actually the City of Windsor owns, the Province of Ontario has, and Ojibway Shores itself is actually owned by the Port Authority. Since the introduction of this bill, I've been trying to save this, as well as others in the community, this land from development. It is now actually on a member of understanding with Parks Canada and Environment Canada to protect it. It's crucial because at one point the Port Authority wanted to bulldoze this area down and develop it, using it basically for landfill from the Gordie Howe Herb Gray Parkway project. That's now protected, and when it actually was inventoried by the field naturalists, it ranks as some of the highest and most valuable property for the ecosystem in Ontario. There are several areas that I'm going to touch on briefly that connect into this. There's a Spring Garden Natural Area, which is the City of Windsor. I was on City Council when we actually protected that. It's got everything from the Duke Skipper, red-headed woodpecker, the gray fox, all kinds of different American chestnut trees, a whole series of ecosystems there. Because we're actually a Carolinian area and off the water, it creates this eco-diversity and a hotspot for species. There's also the Black Oak Heritage Park, which is next to Ojibway Shores. So the Ojibway Shores is right on the waterfront. Then Black Oak Heritage, a City of Windsor property, is right next to it. So we have the port property right next to the city property, but there's no management system there that's in together. And they actually has a savanna, a woodland species, and actually has some of the best chestnut groves that are left over in Ontario. Next to that is a tall grass prairie heritage park, where there's actually a number of different things that are in there: the red-bellied snake, Butler's Gartner snake, eastern fox snake, and common park reptiles are there. And at 1977, they found species that they thought were actually extinct in Canada that are actually still there, and that connects it as well too. Then we have Ojibway Park, and Ojibway Park is next to it and actually has an excellent nature center. So I think you're getting a theme here, is that we have these little plots of land that are owned by different people and different groups. And so this actually has a nature center, walking trails, beautiful ecosystem. It's also had some private areas given to it from the former raceway with the Tom Joy. Next to that, we have Ojibway Provincial Nature Reserve, which is next to that. And there's more rare plants per hectare there than anywhere else in Ontario. And so that's really cool in itself, if you ask me, in terms of what we have around ourselves there. But what's really even special, and why I think this is different than the other urban parks that are being considered, is right across the river is, in the United States, is the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge, which is the only one that they have over there. So across in the United States, if you saw the area, you see on the Canadian side, we have the Bruno Bridge being built. Then we have a swath of green, patchy territory that needs to be connected and managed. On the U.S. side, if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, with Zug Island, it looks like Mordor. It's not very attractive, but there's also another community that's getting revitalization called Delray, which is exciting too, because Sandwich and Delray, Sandwich Town, where I represent, is one of the poorest places in Canada with child poverty. Again, I mentioned the rich tradition that it has in the past with the War of 1812 and the Rum Runners and the Underground Railroad, all those things. But right now, it has some of the highest child poverty, has some of the biggest challenges with the environment, because it's pinned down in this border area from the Ambassador Bridge on one side, a railroad track on the other, and the Detroit River on the other. So it's an exciting renewal opportunity that we're pleased about. And then with the Detroit side, they are putting a lot of money into the Humberg Marsh and a whole bunch of ecosystems. So what this means is this property is now a conduit for keeping things together and for species to migrate and move. So about 12 years ago, local residents fought to keep Ojibway shores from being bulldozed. There's a long story behind that. I won't get into that. Next to it, again, is the Gordie Howe Bridge that's being built. That's actually going to come online in a couple of years. It's exciting. That's been a real fight. And that's actually a good example of doing things right. When I first got here, nobody wanted to build another bridge. It was seen as excessive. It was seen as not needed. We're doing it right. It's a fantastic project that was actually started by the Paul Martin with the original, actually John Kretchen with the original Let's Get Windsor Moving Fund for $200 million. And then later on, it was actually finalized with Stephen Harper's government. It did a terrific job of making sure it was done correctly, because there was a lot of private interests against this. And now it's all unified everybody. And it's a huge thing, win for our environment and for our economy. And that's right next to it. And then so what happened in 2017 is, after we stopped the destruction of the Ojibway shores, the Port Authority did change their mind, let people on board onto the site, and there's like 10 criteria of Ojibway shores to find out whether it's environmentally significant. One is good enough. They had 9 out of 10. And I won't list them all because we don't have time, but it got 9 out of 10 because of the way that the ecosystem is and because of our Carolinian background. So I've been on about this for a long time. We've had a town hall in 2019 where I invited not only just the residents, but we also brought in Caldwell First Nations, the Wildland Leagues, a number of different Americans, even actually American state and federal officials came. So we've had a really good positive input with that, and we've held it up with another town hall meeting just recently as well too. In fact, even when the Prime Minister was down in Windsor in 2020, he said to the union leaders at that time that he supported an urban park down there. So that was good. So in 2021, I introduced C-248 as a bill because there had been discussion of some new urban parks that might come online, but what we wanted was simply what's been done for every other national park to date, is that it actually has its own legislation, just like a bridge or a border crossing. And so that's what we're doing, is we're amending the schedule in the Parks Act to add this area. And I only have 1 minute left to wrap up because I would rather have interaction with everyone. But one of the good news things that happened is, since introducing the bill, that's actually triggered the memo of understanding for the Ojibway shores to be protected from the Port Authority. So that happens happened since then. Parks Canada, to their credit, they were opposed to co-management with Caldwell First Nations at first, have now changed positions, and co-management, which is becoming the norm with First Nations, is important. And I'll finish with this is really kind of one of the most wonderful things we've seen happen out of this entire endeavor. Caldwell First Nations, a brief history as I wrap up, they originally were supposed to get Point Pelee after the War of 1812. They were burned out of their properties, and they were actually then shunted around for a number of different years. They finally reached a settlement, the first new modern settlement that's actually taken place, and they view this as reconciliation and been full-time partners in this. It's a wonderful story in terms of that, and Chief Mary Duckworth has been excellent with this, and you'll hopefully hear from her later. And I want to say thank you to the committee members for considering this, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you. So I'm going to make the first round a 5-minute round, and the second round a 4 and 2 round, so that we can finish on time. Mr. Lewis, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here this afternoon with you all. I hope I'm still on there. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. You know what? It's a beautiful day here in Essex, and it'll be a great day to take a walk in the park, a walk in a park. And so, you know, to the committee, it's pretty unique. This is a very, very unique opportunity for the folks of Essex. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We are somewhat landlocked in Essex Windsor in that we are surrounded by 3 bodies of water. And, you know, I've spoke extensively with Mayor Dilkins as the mayor of Windsor, Mayor Bondi, the mayor of LaSalle, with Mr. Watson, previous member of Parliament. We've done our due diligence, and everybody says this is a fantastic thing to do. So I know I only got 5 minutes. I just used up 1 minute. Mr. Masse, first and foremost, congratulations, sir. I think this is going to be great for both of our communities. You know, with regard to our farm and our farming and our industry, so it's gobbled up a lot of land, and I'm proud of that because we need our farming industry to feed Canadians. We need our industry to pay the bills, but there's not a lot of opportunities to get outdoors for mental health. Can you just expand a little bit as to what this will do for the residents of LaSalle and West Windsor, and quite frankly across the county?
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, and thank you for your assistance on this bill as well, too. This has been a collaborative effort in the region, and that's an excellent point. So our area has like a high degree of manufacturing. In fact, some of this area was originally forested, and when I talked to the port originally, they called it scrub brush. It has now 200 of Canada's 500 endangered species, but it was originally forested. And Mr. Lewis when you look at the amount of agriculture we have, it's high industry. Same with Mr. Epp knows as well too, with the agriculture industry that we have with greenhouses, takes up a lot of space and resources. So this is one of our last few opportunities to bind these elements together. And the reason why I think it's different than the other proposals that are out there is because it's on the international border, because of the diversity of species. And then again, we've paid a lot of price. We have a lot of environmental diseases, high rates of cancer. It's all been well identified by Health Canada, and we get a lot of smog and other types of pollution from the United States. So this is our way for pushing it back, and also for young people to see that they can participate in their ecosystem development.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Through you, Mr. Chair. So this morning I spoke with CFIB as well as with the tourism industry. And so the new Gordie Howe Bridge, pretty exciting. So we're going to get a bike path or a footpath across that. And I think there's some 3 million folks from our friends in Michigan and upstate New York, in Wisconsin, from Ohio. This could be a huge tourism possibility. Do you agree, Mr. Massey?
Absolutely. In fact, actually, it was Minister Champagne that's agreed to have the bike lane and pedestrian lane for free because it's actually going to combat some of the distances we've had over the years with regards to COVID and that. And which is exciting because Slow Roll Detroit, for example, they have at up to 5,000 cyclists meet in downtown Detroit and cycle just in harmony and out in union and have fun. So they could actually cross over there. I had Rashida Tlaib, the Democratic congressional woman, a good friend of mine for 20 years we met, and then also the U.S. ambassador to Canada. We just toured the Gordie Howe Bridge together, and so this is right next to it. And so one of the reasons I also want this to be official national urban park in the way that we're presenting it, because we want to also manage the park properly for the ecosystem. Point Pelee, which is close to us, has a management plan because it gets a lot of bird and ecotourism, but it puts stress on the park. So we want this done properly, and it's exciting to have these ecotourism opportunities, but we also want to make sure they're planned properly.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Through Mr. Chair, I realize I have 55 seconds left. I would like you to expand a little bit with regard to the corridor. So Matchett Malden Road, vital that we allow our folks to get to the new $5.1 billion battery plant, that they get them to the Stellantis. Is that something that in regard of your bill, you have 30 seconds, sir, that you'll ensure that they can get to their workplace and get home quickly?
Absolutely, and that's another reason why the bill is so important, is because other national parks do have corridors through them, but they're managed responsibly, and they're also very important for this region, because when we have all these parsed apart, like I've kind of identified, and I have a map, but it's not in both in official languages, we'll send it to you later, you'll see that there's some roadways there. So there's going to take some good strategy and also investment, and more importantly, it really is the proper way to actually manage those things. So it's a good point, Mr. Lewis, and that's why we have the town of LaSalle and City of Windsor and others on board unanimously for this, because they know that we want to do this.
Okay, Ms. Thompson for 5, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Massey, for coming forward, and thank you for the work that you've done on the private member's bill. Certainly a colleague, a Liberal colleague, who shares a boundary, I believe, with you in Windsor, reviewing the debate. I think he made, for me, a very valid point around process, and I absolutely believe in the need to expand our parks within Canada. I think they're fabulous. I use them as often as I can, but I do believe in process, and in terms of the complexity of this process, in terms of the points of engagement and also the number of parcels of land involved. I think methodical steps are quite important. So to that end, why is this bill necessary when Parks Canada is already working in partnership with the City of Windsor and local First Nations through a partnership committee to establish the National Urban Park in Windsor?
Yeah, so there was an announced process, but there isn't much detail about that, and it's been actually not the process that's normally taken place for national parks. National parks are usually amended to the bill, and they follow the rules that are there. So we don't know about those other ones. And the City Council and the Mayor unanimously supports this bill. Caldwell First Nations Chief Mary Duckworth supports this bill, and so those reasons, come from the genesis of, when Ojibway Shores was going to be demolished. The first thing I did is I reached out to Caldwell First Nations, brought them down to the site, and saw if they were interested in actually trying to fight to acquire the site. They decided to go to Leamington area for a different reason, for better future, for housing, and a whole series of things. And next to be back to Point Pelee, where they're close to, but it's still their traditional territory. So we have a lot of, and we have, the wildland leagues. Everybody's pointing towards legislation because it's the most accountable, most transparent, and it's most evolved in terms of going for the future. And it's different. I don't know about the other parks that are happening with regards to the other urban areas. All I know is this one. I've represented that area for a while, and so I know this fits really well.
Thank you. And again, it's just trying to break down the steps in the process. So again, to boundaries, how do you respond to critics who say that the private member's bill doesn't go far enough? And around that, is there a risk that we'll miss the opportunities to move into a more ambitious vision for the park? And are you open to other boundaries being defined within the park?
Oh yeah. So first of all, I think it was Wildland League said that they don't know of a park that hasn't actually improved over the years. Maybe the only one that isn't is because the Bruce was done in a way that it still has to go through its own legislation. I don't know if you're familiar with that project, but it's actually went the opposite way, similar to what is being proposed right now. I'm concerned with the government on their proposal, and now it's going to be in the courts, and it's going to take longer. But this one is open for amendments in the future. The beauty of it, and why this is almost like shelf ready, is because you have the City of Windsor asking for its property. The mayor actually asked them, take the property. They want to actually upload the property to be proper responsibility. The province of Ontario will have a vote coming up. They've expressed interest in all this, and there's due process even as we go further for that. So there will be, in the future, hopefully future generations will improve the park, and there's plenty of opportunities, and the private sector as well too, which isn't originally in the bill here, but when I was vice chair of the Conservation Authority, and I've also talked to some of the businesses around there, some of them might actually bequeath some of their properties eventually for a national park once it becomes solid. But if you don't have it as an official national urban park, nobody really wants to donate something knowing that it might be undermined later on.
Thank you. Do you have any concerns about whether there's a constitutional authority for this bill?
No. And
Would
the
you
speaker,
explain?
no, it's been the speaker has vetted the bill, and that's why it's here. So I'm very confident in the process. And the speaker, Mr. Rhoda, and I have served for a long period of time together here. He's quite capable of these things, and I'm very confident he knows his due diligence. In fact, we actually shared a floor for a while together before he became speaker.
Thank you, and I think I still have a minute. Okay, thank you. Are there privately held lands within the boundary set out under the bill? And if yes, have the owners been consulted on the bill?
No, there are not private lands, and that's the reason why we start there. It's the logical way to start to deal with the bill, and then later on, if private lands do want to be offered, that's a different story. Like, there's a great property next to it, the Connett family, and we've talked to the Connett family, so has the Port Authority and others. Right now, if you can believe this, next to this beautiful treasure, we have the Gordie Howe Bridge being built, and we have asphalt concrete recycling capabilities in front of our gateway for our new border crossing. And so some of us want to see the Connett property turn to be more environmental ways, but that's another story for another day. But perhaps with this bill, they see this, they perhaps are going to see a legacy, and they're open to discussions and so forth. But again, it comes down to money.
Merci, Madame Posey.
Thank you. Ms. Posey, your turn. I'll yield my speaking time to Ms. Collins.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Masse, as a city councillor and then as a member of parliament, I know you've been very involved in trying to protect and preserve natural areas. You mentioned to Ms. Thompson that legislation is, a really important and potentially the only way to permanently protect this area. You've spoken about how the city once had to purchase a provincial area park to prevent it from being developed. Could you just expand on this for the committee and tell us a little bit about how that informed your understanding of the need to ensure legislation is passed to make Ojibway a national park?
Thank you very much, Ms. Collins, and I appreciate it. Because when I was on City Council, we had a provincial park called Pesh Island. It's in the middle of the Detroit River. It has an ecosystem. Actually, there was the remnants are there. They used to say that the rum runners were there, and there actually are remnants there, and there's all kinds of folklore and so forth. There's actually a little bit of infrastructure on it. And so that provincial park was put up by sale by the provincial government, including a woodlot on the other part of the shore. And so we had to purchase that land, or would have been lost to Americans, or it could have been lost to developers. It was up for sale. So what City Council did at that time is we bought the provincial park for $1.3 million. And the only way to pay for that in terms of getting support to do that is that we actually then had to develop the woodlot, which was used for camping and kids programs, to be a subdivision now. And so one of the things that I want to see, and what I've been told and coached to from the regards to the non-government organizations that are involved in the environmental movement, is what they view as the consistency and the solidity of a project and a plan. And so the normal process to actually create a park is to actually amend the Parks Act and to include it in there. And that's why we want this to be the regular process right now. It's ready. It's perfectly set to be the structure to be advanced in the future, and it doesn't involve any type of barrier aside from just the legislation being needed to be passed and a proper management plan.
Thanks so much. You also talked a lot about how you've been working with the Caldwell First Nation. How long have you been working with them on this project? And could you detail your involvement with the Caldwell First Nation and how you see this really as part of reconciliation for Indigenous communities?
Thank you. And yeah, so it was then former Member of Parliament Cheryl Hardcastle that introduced me to Caldwell First Nations when the Port Authority was looking to sell the Ojibway shores, the shoreline area. And Caldwell First Nations had just got their settlement from basically, and I guess a little more background is Caldwell First Nations fought with the British to protect the country. And again, I mentioned briefly that, they were supposed to get Point Pelee and they didn't get it. And so they went through the courts and a whole series of things. And now it's part of a whole beautiful reconciliation process because they're just set up an agreement with Ontario Hydro with regards to being respected there. They were involved in also helping move the Stellantis plant and other types of development projects that we have. It's a different scenario when I took over as Member of Parliament in 2002 than what it is today. And so we've worked on a series of projects together, including discussing issues of the Jay Treaty, and they're making progress on that as well, too. So I just talked yesterday to Chief Mary Duckworth She's been here on the Hill with me presenting this as a National Urban Park several years ago before COVID. So this has been something that, she's been with me front and center for a long period of time. And so it's been actually, as a member of that area where you get this kind of introduced to you, where we didn't have that chapter, it's been really special. In fact, I brought one of my publications here, just so I know we're familiar with all these things, but this is educating my constituents on Caldwell First Nations. It was a direct flyer because it's a new chapter for us in our area, and it's really special because it's working out well. And they've been part of all the town halls and all the consultation, and that's why they support the bill. And sorry, just one last thing. We were able to get through them. Wyandotte First Nations on the U.S. side is actually supporting this bill as well, too.
That is great to hear. You had mentioned a bit about the potential for co-management. Can you talk about what that opportunity is and the importance of co-management?
Yeah, so co-management is part of the Truth and Reconciliation view that Chief Duckworth views. In fact, we actually had our town hall meeting over the summer about this, and actually the focus was on co-management with the public. So we had about 300 people show up at the event, and part of it's in my publication here is to get people used to that. And so it goes beyond just reacting and consulting. It's actually being participants of how to use the property, how to be engaged with the property. This property doesn't have the access for hunting and fishing. It's too small for that. It's a significant enough property for the ecosystem, but it's one that is going to be very important. So it's part of what they view it, and the exciting part for me is that, we have a lot of, terrible situations to deal with, our First Nations. This is one of the ones that's actually, a light is being shone in a very positive way. But, and the first time I met Chief Duckworth was when they were left out of consultations for the original Gordie Howe Bridge. So I brought them down to the community benefits event, and we crashed it together. So that's kind of how we got to know each other, because they were left off the invitation list, and invited them to come down, and it's been a great relationship, and I know the government's making some good relationships with them as well, too. She was just recently on the Hill here as well, too. So it's been a really good news story.
Thanks so much. You mentioned in your opening remarks and a bit in responses to other committee members about the Detroit River International Wildlife Conservation Area and how it could be connected to the Ojibway National Urban Park. I know you're also our Great Lakes critic and a longtime member of the U.S.-Canada Parliamentarians Group and the U.S. Border Critic, and you have significant involvement and relationships with our friends south of the border. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunity the Ojibway National Parks and the Detroit River International Wildlife Conservation Area presents for the Great Lakes region and also for the relationship between our two countries?
Yeah, thank you. This is another really good one because Vance Badaway, a member of Parliament, has been really good at working on the Great Lakes. In fact, we worked together to get. I'm vice chair of the Canada-U.S. Parliamentary Association, one of the vice chairs, and Vance helped basically trailblazed. We have a special component for Great Lakes now, so we've been lobbying in Ottawa, Washington, and prior to that, it was always hit and miss. I was always pushing against issues here and there. Now it's actually a part of a function of the Canada-U.S. Parliamentary Association, which is excellent. And so, I've been working with Senator Gary Peters for years, Rashida Tlaib, like I said, I've known her for a long time, Stephanie Chan. There's a lot of activity in the U.S. In fact, they're looking at Canada, and they're not very pleased about our Great Lakes investment right now. They're putting in hundreds of millions of dollars. They're also concerned about the DGR. This is a nuclear waste depository project that's in the Huron area. So there's been concerns about that raised. And so they would like to see us be more progressive. And the interesting thing about this project is that we need to have hotspot zones and from the U.S. for the migrating species back into Canada and back into the United States. And that's what this location does for Point Pelee, for Rondo Park, and all the way up here, and then back into the United States. And lastly, just to conclude, this is also one of those things where we're uniting citizens on both sides and NGOs. So the Great Canadian Trail is now going to go over into the United States. That was announced 3 weeks ago. So the actually Canadian Trail is going to go into the U.S. over there. And the U.S. Cycling and all their different sponsors and different groups and organizations came over for that announcement, where there was a number of different people. So actually our trail system is going to go into the U.S. And maybe some people on our border aren't as familiar how, that's just the way we are. They're our cousins, and we're their cousins.
Wonderful. You just mentioned Point Pelee National Park. which, yeah, you're very familiar with. You had talked to me about the ecotourism that's grown significantly related to that park, especially with regards to birding. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
And that's where we're lucky. Both, I don't know if people are aware, Richard Cannings is an ornithologist. I didn't even know what the heck that was until bird guy. So we have a resident bird, and so he came down to the area and toured it with me. And he also went out to Leamington area because at the Hawk Festival, and so there's been a real explosion with regards to this, which has been really great. And so there's a couple other properties outside of this that once we get this defined, we might have some better consensus in terms of increasing the spots. I know, as former conservation chair, vice chair, I should say, people get on board when they see something solid and they know it's going to last. And so the ecotourism's huge. I'd love for it to be part of a repertoire of places people could visit and stop and, not just Point Pelee. And it's getting really active and busy. So, either open up more spots for business or we might have restrictions in the future. And this is a great spot for business.
Wonderful. And I think I'm getting close to the end of my time, but I'd really like to know a bit about how the Ojibway National Urban Park would help with adapting or mitigating climate change in the Windsor area.
In 10 seconds or less.
Flooding. The easiest one for everybody. Look at our area, flooding. It's a great sponge, and we need it, especially for the town of LaSalle and other places. It's an important sponge. And the businesses. The businesses are the same thing because they're flooded.
Yeah, thank you. Okay,
I'll ask a bit more in my next question.
Okay, we'll go to the second round, a 4-minute round. Mr. Epp for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity. Serendipity has allowed me to sub in today, and that makes 3/4 of the Windsor-Essex members of Parliament having the opportunity to speak to this. And one of the disadvantages of going the second round is many of the topics that one wants to cover are covered before. So I'm going to have you retrace just a bit of ground because I have some similar lived experience as you do. Living in Windsor-Essex County, three sides of us are with our American friends. And so can you talk a little bit more about the opportunities? I'm heavily influenced. I'm a diehard with our national sport. I'm a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, have to be. But I'm also a Detroit Lions and a Detroit Tigers fan. This park, yes, sorry, Blue Jays. This park, again, establishes another cross-border opportunity. I've attended the Freedom Fireworks, the Gordie Howe Bridge. There's all sorts of other international cooperation. Can you expound a little bit more? I know we've talked a little bit about the walking and the bike paths. What else does this do culturally? Because we are so intertwined. I've got Point Pelee Park in my riding, and so I have a lot of Detroit cottagers on the way to Point Pelee Park. What does this expand?
Well, yeah, thank you, Mr. Epp. And first of all, I'm a Blue Jay fan, and after that last game, we actually still have to apologize. Yeah, it didn't work out so well. But no, and thank you for your work. Like we've seen the highly industrialized area, also agriculture, had to work back. I mean, we've been doing those things, but our connections to the United States, as you mentioned, are so imperative, and it's been hard over the last number of years. Like we have family members. Like I'm not sure people are aware of the connections. You almost have to experience. So the area that's next to this, like in my riding, goes through a lot. Your riding is there's 40,000 cars per day and 10,000 trucks per day go through right next to Sandwich Town, and on half of that traffic, some of it's family, friends, businesses, and colleagues. And we've really suffered with regards to the Western Hemisphere travel initiatives, which is when the U.S. first introduced passports. A lot of U.S. citizens didn't want to get passports. A lot of U.S. citizens, haven't come because of, other issues. And this is a way of bringing some of that back. And it's also economics. We know that the tool and die and the trade industry, when they go back and forth, we actually get contracts and we get development, we get all kinds of synergies. And so if we miss out on those, it would be awful. And we even get tours before COVID for people coming back for the Underground Railroad, finding where their relatives ended up. Because many of them fled the United States to come to Canada, and there was actually a number of tourism initiatives just to deal with that.
Thank you. In a previous life, I actually worked with the Food Grains Bank, and we established a growing project which we have across Canada in one of our other urban parks, in Rouge River Park in Toronto. Rouge River Park, I'm familiar, also has thoroughways through it. So we're farming inside that park. We're having transportation inside that park. Can you talk about some of the unique aspects of having an urban park here in Ojibway?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And I've toured the Rouge, and the Rouge actually came down from our original meeting. So I've been out there a number of times, and you're absolutely right. It shows you that you can live and actually develop your ecosystems within an urban area. And there is, when issues related to industry and ecosystems, there can be solutions. And that's what I really am excited about the Rouge. And what they've been doing is that they have, as you mentioned, they have roadways, they have multifaceted types of activity taking place. And that's what we need. But we need a good business plan, and we need an accountable business plan, and that's why I like this legislation, is because it also requires you to come back a series of points of times with public consultation as the plan evolves and develops and goes forward, including submitting actually accountability to Parliament. That's another thing that's different, is that we have to do that. So those are the reasons why I think it's important.
Pretty much done.
Sorry, Mr. Epp.
Mr. Longfield for 4 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Massey. It's great to see you at the table. We served on industrial committee together back in the 42nd Parliament, and always enjoy working with you. I wanted to come back to Parks Canada, and as you've mentioned just now about Rouge, and that was a park that was turned over to Parks Canada in 2017. A new process for establishing urban national parks. And the private members bill we have in front of us seems to be on a parallel track to the consultation process that Parks Canada has been following. As you know, taking 20 opportunities and narrowing them down and narrowing down. Saskatoon is in the running. We've got Windsor in the running, but landing on Windsor as an opportunity through the consultation process with Parks Canada. Could you comment on that process? You said earlier, you kind of said, well, it's not really clear what that process is, but we'll ask Parks Canada, I'm sure, in a future part of the study, but could you maybe comment on the existing consultation process?
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Longfield. And yeah, it's always been a pleasure to serve. And I think it's a good and a fair question. The thing is that I feel about this, and we actually started this process before the process that the Parks Canada is doing did their thing. And that came out just previous to an election where it was announced. And then later on, they've been having meetings with different groups and organizations, which is good. There's actually been some recent movement since we've tabled the legislation, and I got drawn, at the top of the legislation tree, so to speak. And I could have chose something else that would have been maybe easier to get done.
To be fair, that process is ongoing. To be fair, they didn't pick it up because of your private members.
Okay, so some of it started, but we're not. Anyway, we're not privy of all those meetings and discussions. We get them from third parties after they happen. So what the difference is that I'm looking for is the actual full process for the future as well too. And so that's why the legislation was put forth, is that it's going to include the accountability through the Parks Act. And that's kind of really where we see it. And that's what we asked the drafters of the legislation what would be the best way to actually enshrine this as a park and to have it consistent. Because right now, every park has to have its own legislation. That's the way it works.
Great, thank you. I feel like I'm in your role and you're in Navdeep Bain's role in Indu, as I recall. Just trying to get as many questions in as I can. You mentioned the Caldwell First Nation, and I'm also aware that the Walpole Island First Nation is also within the region. Have you done any consultation work with Walpole?
Yeah, we've left most of the consultation with Caldwell for that. I actually have a Walpole Island pin on me right now because I work with them in the J Treaty. They're in my office and that. So they're aware of the work that's going on. Caldwell's been with them. And part of Truth and Reconciliation is also to make sure that they have their strategy, and they are both engaged with Parks Canada as well, too. It's a good question.
Yeah, and I think that's really when we're talking about reconciliation and working with Parks Canada and having them go through that process as part of the Government of Canada and under the Parks Act, as you said, I think is an important thing to respect, and that members of Parliament don't interrupt that part of the consultation.
Yeah, that's not happening here. But the reality for me as a local member is that Caldwell First Nations represents the land there, and that's who we went to start our consultation, and we've left it to them. They're working with their different organizations, and we actually had a big meeting in Windsor over the J Treaty recently. That's over the boundary stuff, and so that was there, and they were also up on the Hill for the J Treaty discussions as well too, which I've heard some positive things taking place.
Good. Thanks. And I also appreciate that this isn't a partisan thing. We've spoken with Eric Kuzmierczak, who's also quite excited about the park being established following whatever the process is that Parliament decides and works on.
Thank you. Madame Posey, est-ce que vous...
Ms. Posey, no, once again, I'll yield my time to my colleague. Ms. Collins, you have 4 minutes once again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to Madame Posey for the time. I just wanted to go back to the question about adaptation and mitigation, and specifically around floods. Could you expand a little bit about how the Ojibway National Urban Park would help this area?
Yeah, so right now, you actually have the border crossing that is there. You already have it as a lower area. So even when they're building the Gordie Howe Bridge, it's taking longer on the Canadian side, and Mr. Epp will know this too, is that we've actually had to fill in the property and let it settle because it's already at a low level, and a low level at the river. And that's another complication that we face, and another reason why, like the Rouge, it got its own legislation. The Rouge has its own legislation. Every other national park has its own legislation. That's part of the reason that we want it, because there's other complexities there that are going to involve, the international border, boundary issues, and then with that, basically that sponge area, we want to protect that. And the businesses there also want that. They don't want that developed as well, too, because if it's developed, then it's going to create more problems. And we have major agriculture down there and fueling and so forth, a whole series of things. So that's kind of it's a gem right in amongst a lot of tough stuff that's going on there.
Thanks so much. Now, you had also mentioned, in addition to the work you've been doing with the Caldwell First Nation, also across the border, the Wendat First Nation. Can you talk a little bit more about that developing relationship?
Yeah, that's an exciting one too. That's the Wyandotte. And so when you look at our 300 plus years of Francophonie, and then also before that, it was basically Huron Church Road was a highway for going into the, and it's the oldest settlement west of Montreal. And so we have a lot of traditions with the Huron as well too. And so these are important things. And that was the thing with Caldwell First Nations and others, is that they went back and forth over the border. That's why the Jay Treaty is thing. And it's part of what Mr. Epp was referring to earlier with regards to our relations going back and forth. These are part of who we are as a people. And that's kind of really exciting. So there's been that extra contact that's been taking place as more and more people are, realizing what we have here, and that there's movement on it. It's just growing. It's just growing and getting better. And that's kind of exciting because we've had those things before. They're rather unique. And with COVID, we were locked out of each other's lives. And now it's opening up in another way. It's kind of amazing.
You've already talked a bit about the Gordie Howe Bridge, and that it's the largest federally funded infrastructure project in the country, and connecting Windsor, Detroit, the business border crossing, or the busiest border crossing. How can you expand a little bit about how Ojibway National Park would be connected with this new bridge?
Yeah. So this is actually, I was there the other day, and it's amazing because there's actually going to be this section where you can take your bike and your e-bike or whatever it might be. Who knows what they're going to be anymore, or walk across. And there's a section go separately. They're there, and there's a tourism section that's going to be caught right into Sandwich Town. And this is huge for the people down there. I mentioned they were pinned by the water. They're pinned by the Ambassador Bridge. If you're not familiar with the Ambassador Bridge, this is a billionaire American who's boarded up homes on the Canadian side, and he's known for, and the family, it's Matthew, his son now. We've had to bring in a special law to bring it under control. It's been in several stories of problems over the years, and they had no community benefits. The Gordie Howe Bridge got community benefits the first time, and those community benefits to go to Sandwich Town to help it deal with the poverty and help deal with the other issues. And so part of that is a tourism that connects in there. So the bike lanes coming, a brand new roads going into Sandwich Town, and this urban park goes right next to it. And what's kind of cool is also the urban park will connect into the Herb Gray Parkway, which also has extensive trail systems going all the way out to the 401. So this is another way to get into a whole other section that I didn't talk about that is also already developed in there, and it's actually won awards. So we've done it right. We want to finish it right.
Good. Okay, Mr. Kurek.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Kurek for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And, I think this is one of those unique opportunities in a minority parliament. And our Westminster system gives these I think, tremendous opportunities for there to be discussions. And as I was looking into this bill before the vote that took place, was surprised that I think it was all but two members of the government, and with full opposition support, it passed and was sent to this committee. And certainly that's an interesting dynamic that exists. And being in a province, we have an international park, Waterton Lakes, a tremendous example. And that's where I'd like to take my question. I was surprised that most members of the government voted against it. But if you could highlight some of the opportunities that exist with economic development, reconciliation, and tourism that really can come out as a result of members of Parliament doing what we do in this place, and that's being able to forward the issues that are important to Canadians and the unique dynamics of this being a minority parliament where we're at committee discussing this important bill.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, no, I was a little bit surprised, too, that I didn't get a little more government support. Some of the stuff now is almost like grabbing at clouds as what's wrong with the bill. So I'm open to amendments. I'm open to changing it. I'd like to have everybody, support this bill. And I'm appreciative and very grateful for the openness. And I've tried to be transparent. And then when I had, and to be fair, both of, the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives and the Green Party had some concerns and things. I had to work on getting those resolved. And they're smaller things, but I was very happy to get that input. And I'm looking for that input on the government side because I would like more than 2 Liberals to vote for it. And it is a unique thing. I mean, I've been through, my first parliament here was 2002 during a majority, and I've been through Liberal majorities, Liberal minorities, Conservative minorities, and whatever you want to have here. You have life short, time short. That's why last time I worked with Mr. Waugh on a bill, was really proud to do that because it actually helped me to grow as a person, and that's what I want to do here. I don't want to stop growing as a person at the table here and trying to find solutions as to getting that. If we don't do those opportunities, they get, and there's what I've learned about this place, it can be a logic-free zone, and it can be that way, and it takes everybody, including myself, to keep it that way. And sometimes, why we're here is that we have to make some political decisions. And I know it could be convenient just to basically to not see this unique as way I do it, but that's my job. And it's never been easy to get the border crossing done. Never been easy to do some of the other work I've done. But that's my job as a representative for that area, is to prove the case. And we did this with the border. When we were told it was not necessary, it was not needed, we fought until we got it done and right. I believe the same things for this case. It's unique. It's on the border. It fits a lot of different things. I don't understand why we can't get it done.
And I think I just have a few seconds. I'd note, interestingly, I didn't expect my first meeting as vice chair of this committee to see Stephen Harper being given credit in both panels that exist. So with that, I'd cede my time to move forward. Thanks, Chair.
And Lawrence Cannon.
So you cede your time to Mr. Duguid, I guess? Whoever.
I think there's only probably 20 seconds left.
Yeah, okay, so we'll finish with Mr. Duguid for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Masse for appearing before us today. And I think you've heard around the table, Mr. Masse, that there is a shared goal. I think there may be some differences in the pathway to get there, but I think all of us share the view that this is a very special place on Earth and needs to be protected. And I particularly understand your passion. I was a former city councillor for 2 terms and protected a small patch of tall grass prairie, the most endangered ecosystem in Canada. There's less than 1% of it left, and so I share your passion. It was in Bill Blakey's riding, rest his soul, and I prevented a big roadway from going right down the middle of it. I was called all sorts of names, hindrance to progress, and so maybe I understand some of the criticism that you're getting, and it's an incredible educational resource for the people of Transcona and the broader city. And my question, I think, has already been answered. You are open to amendments if they strengthen the proposal, so that was good to hear. I'm curious about your interactions with Parks Canada and with other members of Parliament. And particularly the Liberal member that shares a border with you. It does seem that we share a common interest, and I'm just wondering about your interactions, particularly with Parks Canada, to get to that good place that we all want.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we have had discussions with Parks Canada. They're having discussions with other groups and organizations, but we don't really know what the process is. And so they have been, like we asked about Caldwell First Nations being co-managers. At first they said no, now they're saying yes, and they're actually funding that. So it's excellent. And Parks Canada, before my bill, when I started working on saving the property, we went to them obviously for advice when dealing with Point Pelee to understand the ecosystems and the diversity of it and why it's necessary. It's only convinced me more what the work they're doing in Point Pelee is why we need this as a national urban park with the full package, and it's different. And with Mr. Kazmierczak, I mean, I've always enjoyed working with him, and we've had frank discussions about this. And quite frankly, I think that, before there was a bill with regards to single event sports betting last Parliament, the government introduced their own legislation, but then they pulled it off the table, knowing that it wasn't going to go. And I think it's a similar vein here, is that every once in a while, and I'm not saying I'm right, but I know this area. I've represented this area for a long time, and I think I've tried to do the right thing with consultation from the day one, and I'm looking to enhance it. I am open to amendments because every piece of legislation needs help.
Mr. Chair, I see it's the top of the hour. It is Friday afternoon, and could I cede my time to the chair?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I just want to use that time to thank Mr. Masse for his passionate and eloquent, support of the bill and all the work he's done on it. So, for the benefit of the members, the next meeting is in camera. We're doing the drafting instructions for the clean tech study, and then we'll start looking at the fossil fuels report. So thank you, Mr. Masse, and thank you to everyone, and I wish everyone a very good weekend. Thank you.
Good weekend, everybody.